And today we're going to be talking about these themes that Stephanie's going to be walking us through, and then I'm going to kind of chime in on it from specifically the career piece of it. But mindset, as I mentioned early on, mindset is kind of key to this whole thing, critical to it. Streamlining, how do we do that? And then ultimately, one of the things that most people love to hear about is how am I going to save at least 10 hours in a week? What are a few actionable things you can do to save 10 hours in your week? I want to talk for a moment about what is the power of mastering your time and why is this so important? Obviously, so we have Dean on the left. This is a real gentleman, Dean Ditto. The guy on the right, his name has been changed to protect the innocent. But Dean was a CFO in manufacturing, and now he's a CFO in biotech. And it took him several months before he could figure out why he wasn't able to get the kind of positions that he was looking for and why he wasn't landing the kind of conversations he was looking for to get into a new industry, but at the right level and in the right culture as well. He was struggling kind of with all those different things. And the big thing for him was he felt like he was kind of churning on it. You know, he's doing things, but not getting any traction out of it. So within 37 days, he was able to get to a new CFO role in a biotech company and navigate through those interviews. And the reason we were able to cut that time down from the time he started in on our accelerated program or finished it until he landed is because what we were doing is giving him, and we're going to talk about all these different aspects in a moment, but the process, the step-by-step things you need to do, how to do them, what to say, some tools and technology to help make it go faster, more consistently, and really being clear from the very start of all of it about what exactly he wanted to do. Because when he started talking about it, he was saying, well, I kind of want to do finance things, but I want to do it in this industry, and I kind of want to do it in that industry, and there's some operational things I like to do too. And so the message was very confused, which led to confusing conversations that were creating indecision about what a person could do to help him, how they would lead him to a next step. So when you put things into clarifying process and assign your time to the right things, doing them the right way, suddenly you get traction in the thing that you want to pursue, whether it's this particular thing about going after a career transition or other things. And so Stephanie's going to be talking a little bit more about that. Greg, on the other hand, it exemplifies what a lot of us have happening, which is that, oh man, I'm doing all backwards here. He wasn't sure who to contact, what to say, when to reach out, how to do it. And so, and that's often what happens when we aren't mastering our time effectively. We don't have a clear process. We don't have a certain set of goals, and that we put them in with dates and times to it that we want to accomplish small, measurable things that we can get done. And what happens is you'll spend 6 months in this case of sort of wandering around trying to figure out how am I going to get this done. So it takes a lot longer with that uncertainty and confusion, quite honestly. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So that was a story about Dean. He did land, literally, he did the accelerator program in about 6 weeks. He went through very quickly and straightforward, and he actually got done in just 6 weeks. Started in October, finished December, and then was in the new bioscience company that he wanted to get into, Midacine Innovation Group, as of January of 2021. And one of the main things he discovered he needed to do was figuring out how to get new biotech content into his talk track and his personal brand. And one of the ways he went about doing that was joining a professional association that gave him the credibility around bioscience, because he really wasn't from that. He was from manufacturing. So those are some of the key things that we talk about within our program of how we do this and helping you to get your time management organized. My name is Patrice, CEO of Career Connects, serial entrepreneur, been in the MarTech space for probably about a decade and a half. Done 3 successful exits, and I spend my time now mentoring others in entrepreneurship. I speak a lot on personal brand and on being an entrepreneurial leader, especially for women-led business owners. Love to encourage them on how they get over $1 million, preferably quickly. And I'm a board member on two privately held companies and a couple of nonprofit associations. Most people resonate with my moniker about being a recovering engineer, you'll find I'm highly process focused, which is a little odd for somebody who does a lot of personal branding and marketing. It's an interesting juxtaposition. The reason I launched the Career Connects platform, and the reason why we have Kristin Kenton, who's one of our partners on that, and today we have Stephanie with us to talk with you guys, is because all of us are very dedicated about helping leaders like yourself land that next position as quickly as possible and as painlessly as possible, as gracefully as possible. There's a lot of unpleasantness about doing a job search. And so we are all here to help you get beyond the unpleasantness as quickly as possible. For us, for me personally, that means you need to be landed in your next deal in under 90 days. And we do that for 87% of the people that we work with, predominantly because we use a peer group type of approach to it. And we have a platform that gives you a very structured step-by-step way of getting these things done and allocating your time. Time allocation is a big part of it. Kristin Kenton.
Yep, I'm Kristin Kenton. I'm an entrepreneur and I run two businesses, primarily Kenton Talent Management. And really I serve as a trusted people advisor, primarily to owner operators, small, middle market, C-suite, and then private equity, right? So the people that they need transformational leaders that grow it, fix it, or exit typically. I also run the Executive Women's Summit, which is a passion project for sure. We run pretty exclusive quarterly gatherings that are invite only, the director level and above. One of which is our co-ed event coming up on July 27. I should update this slide. So July 27, we're talking about grit and other sort of who-based talent superpowers that are now really becoming increasingly attractive in today's business climate, right? We need adaptable, we need, people that can do change management, we need grit, resilience, determination, right? These are soft skills that companies are starting to pay attention to and say, oh, these are the superpowers that build sustainable, successful companies, not the what, not the previous industry experience or this specific certification, right? So I like helping companies hire for who. And within the Women's Summit, we have a university program that helps women level up, both as leaders and human beings. So our next cohort kicks off March or April of 2020. So if you're a female leader and want to level up, it's sort of this really unique emotional intelligence / leadership development program. So that's me.
Awesome. She's a great partner and advocate for what we're doing here. And as a recruiter, she has a very unique perspective on how to find talent and attract the right kind of talent. As a retained recruiter, she works at that director and above level. So if you are in a company that's looking for hiring, someone to come in and help with hiring needs, definitely connect with Kristin. She's going to be one of those star performers who backs up what she says in terms of the process and delivery. You bet. Do you want to introduce Stephanie?
Sure. Yeah. So Stephanie is a dear friend. She's actually a board member on the Executive Women's Summit. So Stephanie is also an entrepreneur. She's the founder of Gallantry Coaching and Consulting. And so she basically helps companies build, grow, sustain, diversify. She's also certified in the 12-week year, and she's just an unbelievable partner, advisor. I mean, very, very credible connector, influencer. She's one of my personal heroes and best friends. So Stephanie, welcome. Thanks for doing this today with us.
Indeed. Stephanie, you want to tell us a little bit about mindset?
Sure. I want to preface this whole conversation with a lot of the ideas and concepts that we're going to talk about today are not new. They're not special. It's not necessarily something that you haven't seen before. I think there's two real critical pieces. One, which Debbie and I were talking about earlier, implementation, right? Which is a whole nother conversation for another day. We're not going to get into some of those things. but it's also your mindset around it. And so when we talk about, specifically from the 12-week year perspective, when we talk about the way that the world rewards us in the professional sense, and for us, obviously, many of us are in transition, we're really looking at the result, right? What is it that we're trying to achieve? Finding that new role. And so understanding that if result is ultimately what we're trying to achieve, that's just a series of actions. And the way that we go about those actions is really rooted in our experiences or our background, right? Maybe Patrice and I, if you asked both of us to make a fried egg, Patrice would do it the way that her grandmother taught her versus I would explain the way my college roommate taught me, right? All the things that led us to where it is that we are today, whether it was a manager that influenced us, a relative, someone in our world, education experiences, all help us make those decisions from an action perspective, which goes to thinking, right? So the way that we think results in the way that we're thinking leads us to the action, and the action leads us to the result. So I think the challenge is that in a lot of cases, we spend too much time focusing on that middle section, which is all about the action. Like, what do you do? How do you do it? How are we going to get this done? But what we're not focusing on is the thinking around it, because foundationally, the thinking is what causes the result. And so as we're going through our discussion today, I would encourage you to just self-reflect on some of these concepts when you're introduced to them. How am I thinking about this? What's my attitude towards this? Is it, oh my gosh, that's too overwhelming, or that doesn't actually work, that's just a fairy tale, or that's not really true, or maybe you're intimidated, whatever your thinking is, to just become aware of it as we're approaching this. Because when it comes to time and time management, it's very much a mindset issue, far less an action issue. And so we'll get a little bit more into that later.
So in terms of mindset, some of the things that we talk about from a career perspective and helping to get to the right mindset is doing things like setting your North Star objectives and your goal tests. Also changing your mindset from I'm the only one who can do these things to what are other alternatives. So figuring that out within the career context of understanding, do I want to do finance and operations, or am I really a finance executive who happens to have other skills, including operational excellence? So getting clear about the alternatives and setting your mindset in a clear direction, and then balancing the needs of others comes into this whole mindset thing, which is what we were talking about at the beginning of where do we allocate our time? Where are we struggling right now? You know, a lot of us said health was our big issue. And some of us talked about family and how does family fit in with our volunteer time? So balancing the needs of others. So it all comes back into this whole need to evaluate the mindset, get that clear, setting some priorities around it. So streamlining. Stephanie, you want to talk to us a little bit more about this one?
Sure. Patrice, can you go to the next slide for just a second?
You bet.
I think this will give us good context. In the 12-week year, we really talk about 3 principles and 5 disciplines. And as much as I wish during our time today we could get through everything, we're just flat out. There isn't enough time for us to get to everything. So we're going to focus specifically more on the time use. But I would say process control is absolutely a component of how it is that we use time. So Patrice, if you want to go back to the last slide, how it is that we're using our time. I think the challenge is right now that we literally spend more time planning our trip to the grocery store than we do our week. There are very few times that we are spending the time to look ahead and to figure out what's on the schedule and what's the plan. Not to mention the fact that going back to, Stephen Covey's concept of putting the big rocks in first, how are we, Patrice, thank you, laid out a great list of a lot of cases what we see big rocks. How are we putting those big rocks into the calendar initially, and then allowing other pieces or things, I'm going to use Jeff's example of the chores, are falling in around the big rocks that we're really focusing on. Unless, of course, Jeff, I don't want to make a judgment. Maybe chores is the big rock.
No.
So allowing that kind of smaller rocks, the pebbles, the sands, you all have seen this analogy before, but how are we doing those things so we're making sure that the really important things are landing on our calendar and we're adhering to whatever it is that we have created in that space? And we'll put a pin in that because we're going to talk about that a little bit more later. But if you're not in control of your time, it will absolutely control you. I think we've all been in this situation where we've, racked our brains and got to the end of the day and you're like, I just don't know, I was just so busy, but I wasn't able to get the things done that needed to get done. So when it comes to becoming great, you must choose to allocate your time to its greatest potential. Patrice, could you forward the slide for me? Really being able to focus specifically on how it is that you're allocating your time is going to become so critical. And so being mindful, not any different than you would in a budget. If you were in sometimes our personal finances, we don't treat them the same as the office, but if you were the head of a department and you had to be very critical of how it was that you were spending the dollars within your organization, do you have that same mindset? Do you have that same attitude when you're thinking about how it is that you're investing, not spending, not wasting, but investing your time?
Cool. So in terms of career transitions, some of the ways that you might think about streamlining your career transition is, first off, managing those career distractions. To Stephanie's point, I think that's a great analogy. We spend more time planning what we do going to the grocery store than we do about planning the next week. And so getting a game plan about how you're going to manage career distractions, most often those distractions pop up in unexpected ways, like your family suddenly decides that, oh, you're not working full time, so of course you can handle these extra little to-dos, and can't you take the dog for a walk, etc., etc. So being mindful of those career distractions, creating a 4-week plan, and I'm hoping Stephanie's going to talk about the 12-week year, which we're going to get to that in a moment, and a little bit about what that means. And having one big goal that you want to accomplish each week so that you get something of significance done relative to the career transition piece, and then defining those tactics, tools, and templates. So these are all ways that you can help yourself to streamline career transitions. All right, Kristin, did you have a comment or question?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think one of the biggest distractions in terms of career transition is these little things that we do to make ourselves feel like we're working on our plan, but they're just wasting time. Like, for instance, updating your resume. You do it once, you do it right, you don't do it again unless somebody that's willing and able to hire you tells you to change it, right? So just do the resume once. Applying online, director level above, it's like less than 10% of people get their jobs through application online, right? So these little things like, searching through job alerts and updating resumes and sending emails out to people that aren't willing and able. I think getting really clear on the willing and able piece is important, like where you're investing your time and in the meetings, and are they going to be willing and able? They have to be both, right? Letting go of all these little updates with the self-marketing stuff that should only happen once.
Love it. Great little insights, great little tidbits to follow there. Stephanie, can you tell us a little bit about the 12-week year? How all that fits in?
I would say from a very basic perspective, it's about being very intentional about your time. We use a methodology called periodization, which was actually created in Eastern Europe. I like to use the Olympics as the reference point. For those, I think most of us are probably old enough to remember in the 80s and 70s, Eastern Europe was kind of crushing us in the Olympics in many different sports back in those days. And so the theory is that you're focusing on one very specific thing for a short period of time to create the habit around that so that you can get really good at it and then move on to the next piece. And I think it very much translates to what we're talking about today. If this is the one thing that we're really focusing on for a very short period of time, how do we make sure that we're aware of what that looks like? So I use the analogy of a downhill skier, right? If you are a downhill skier and you're trying to get to the bottom as quickly as possible, we may just be focusing on decreasing your time down the mountain by where it is that you're planting that right pole. And so we may create a 12-week year plan. To be honest, Michael Lennington, who is the co-author of the 12-week year, is one of my coaches and mentors. And at the beginning of COVID, we both said to each other, whoa, wait a minute, 12 weeks is like way too long, like too many changes, too many things going on. And so on a lot of cases, we're using those same principles, but reducing the amount of time, which could be anywhere from a 6-week plan, a 4-week plan, a 5-day plan, but the principles are all the same. How are we being very strategic about what we're selecting, and then making sure that we're allocating the time around it, and going back to our main disciplines? How does that relate to our vision? How we're planning is very different than what you would see in the traditional planning space. What's our process control around it? Are we making sure that the processes are set up correctly? I like to use the analogy, you know, you can't lose weight if the Oreos are in the pantry at eye level, right? What's our process control? Are we keeping score to make sure that we're actually doing the thing that we said we would do and being effective at it? And then also, how are we allocating our time?
And the last piece is about saving 10 hours a week. I wanted to just point out first off that about 28% of the workday is spent on emails for most people. It's a large number. And so one of the things to think about is, how are you specifically managing that? And at 2.6 hours per day is typically what we spend, versus you can in 30 minutes get through what is typical for most people, about 120 messages that people get in a day. And so if you can cut it down from this 2.6 hours spent across the day to 30 minutes, you can do a full 10 hours that you're saving. I don't know that that's a day there. It's a week, not a day, that you save across the week by changing the process of how you handle email. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that here. Stephanie, do you want to address any of these, or do you want me to walk through them?
You're welcome to walk through them. If you don't mind, I want to read a quote really quick that I think is very relevant. It's in the same vein, but from the 12-week year, is that there's on page 129, there was a research study that said that after being distracted by serious mental tasks, by things like emails or instant messages, the typical Microsoft worker took an average of 15 minutes to get back to the original task, right? That's the basis of what we're talking about. It's this shifting of tasks that gets us in trouble. That's where we're losing the time. I'm sure you have been there, that you were in the middle of an email and the phone rings, or you get a text message, or somebody walks in the room and you come, and then you got to start at the beginning of the email again. So it's not just about putting all the things together. It's that switching process that gets us in trouble as well. So being able to group like items like we've outlined here is going to be really critical.
So we chose to just focus on email because we know that this is a big time suck for a lot of people. And we typically allow ourselves to be run by our email box. Like, we just pay attention, and then we see something come up, we leave our notifications on, we respond Pavlovianly to the ding bell of, oh, go do something on that thing that just dinged you. And so avoiding that is what we're trying to help you learn a new process and a new principle about, to consider that you really only need to look at email a couple of times a day. Sometimes for some people, maybe 3 times a day. But if you start with just 15 minutes in the morning and 15 minutes in the late afternoon, you will discover that a lot of things end up taking care of themselves in the interim. So by not being super hyper responsive to things, people oftentimes will figure things out for themselves or come up with an answer, etc. So being hyper responsive is not always the best idea. And applying the basic principle when you're reading your emails of, should I be deferring this? Can I delegate it to somebody else? Can I dump it, as in it really shouldn't have been in my inbox in the first place? Like, notifications about YouTube notifications, if you happen to get those, or social events and things that you no longer are interested in doing. Those kinds of things, we actually encourage you to go in and unsubscribe from it, but ultimately dumping it, or at the end, doing it. So taking the moments to deal with all the emails at that time to do whatever it is. Sometimes that means taking the email, the content of that email, and putting it into the calendar place where you're going to deal with it, or in your, however you might do your time management, if that's a project management tool, whatever that might be. So figuring out how you're going to do it. So deferring it to the future, delegating it, dumping it, or doing it, and being really intentional about the decision-making process. Organizing your emails. So there's a variety of different ways that I'm oftentimes surprised people are not aware of using folders such and rules in your email tool, whatever your tool of choice is. Almost all of them have some kind of rules that allows you to take emails that come in and automatically route them into appropriate folders so you can look at them in the appropriate time at the appropriate cadence. So using folders, and in that way also consolidating email addresses. So rather than, we run into a lot of executives who have a challenge with kind of work emails, personal emails, their professional personal email versus their family email. So you have all these different types of emails, some of which should be coming all together, which is about this whole idea of consolidating email addresses. And then for some people, it's about breaking them out and getting them into the folders where they should be. So figuring that out so you don't have to remember to go and log into different email editors and tools to read them. So that's another key time saver on this. And then making sure that with all of the doing it part here, that you're using a concept of calendar blocking, which I know Stephanie's going to talk about in a moment, but having these pieces about strategic buffer and breakout, which we're going to cover in a moment. And then finally is the concept of time boxing. So a lot of times we forget that if we just tell ourselves, it's kind of amazing how time is like elastic. If you say, I'm going to give myself 1 hour to do something, or in this case, 50 minutes, and then I have to stop and I have to take a 10-minute break, amazingly, you get the things done. You find a way to get done in 50 minutes, the thing you need to get done. If, for example, sometimes you have to get out of the house in 30 minutes, and normally you take an hour or an hour and a half to do a myriad of things. But if you have to get out in 30 minutes, suddenly you discover, I can get out of the house in 30 minutes, as a big, broad example. So using that principle, it's a really effective thing to give yourself consistent breaks throughout your day. A lot of times we become very ineffective when we don't have breaks. Our brain is just not functioning as well. And so we're not as productive when we start sort of spinning around. So 50-minute sprints is a good idea with a 10-minute break in there, where you just kind of breathe through it and move on. All right, so Stephanie, talk to us a little bit about this whole time blocking and how this works.
Sure. So Brian and Michael's philosophy around time blocking in the 12-week year is very specific groups of different kinds of blocks that you're using. So the first is strategic blocking. And I think no matter if you're in human resources or finance or working as an engineer, there are times when we really have projects that we need to be working on, right? We need to get deep in the work. We need to work on the PowerPoint. We need to create the proposal. We need to analyze and type. Those strategic blocks come in, the recommendation is probably 3 hours of one time a week where you're really getting deep in that specific project. And it could be specific to a project that if you're like, it's going to take me 2 hours, great, book the 2 hours. But I think the most critical piece is making sure that you don't have those distractions. And I want to just take a little bit of a left turn here for a second. All these philosophies that we're talking about is really important. What Patrice mentioned about, the frequency of checking your email, using these types of blocking systems. It's critical that you are informing stakeholders around you about the changes that you've made so that they can support you in this. So if you have direct reports and they know that you only check your email in the morning and the afternoon, or that you're going to go out for a strategic block, they're like, you know what? Stephanie's behind closed doors. She's working on a very important project. Unless there's blood or fire, we don't bother her. And then that way I can get real deep in whatever it is that I'm doing. So understanding not only to utilize these, but to make sure that individuals around you understand how it is that you're doing this, because that no distractions piece is not always something that we can control by turning off our phone. We need to tell others about it. The second one is buffer block. So creating those times during the day where you can do things. How many times I've had conversations with executives, they're like, can we just start this meeting 5 minutes later? Because I haven't actually stopped by the ladies' room yet today, right? I know it sounds crazy, but we're not even creating a space to refill our water or to use the restroom or to step away and eat lunch. So creating those times during your day so that you do have a few minutes between meetings to collect your thoughts, write something down, get a drink of water, stop by the restroom, whatever it is that needs to occur, but grouping those low value activities together like email or returning phone calls so that you can increase the efficiency. Again, going back to that switching conversation we had earlier. And the last one is breakout blocks. We get into the position where we're like, go, 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 go. We need to step away because we're not seeing the forest for the trees. We're so close to that bark. And especially as you're going through your job search journey, really taking time out to say, what do I love to do? And what don't I like to do? But you have to create that space to be able to self-reflect in maybe another location. I have a lot of my clients intentionally do their breakout blocks out of the office. They're not in the office. They're not distracted. And going back to the Pavlov's concept, they go to a very specific location when they do breakout blocks. So they've trained themselves to be in a position where when they're in that space, they're very creative, or they feel very relaxed so that they can let kind of the juices flow. But making sure that you have these on your calendar so that you can plan to them. Taking out a half a day or a day a month, most executives can't just do that tomorrow, right? We need to be very intentional and make sure it's on the calendar in the future. Kristin knows that I have these things blocked out literally through the end of the year, and I'm able to schedule things around them as a result because I have them already on the calendar.
All right, so let's talk a little bit more about the actual art of time blocking.
So I'm not going to lie, a lot of people, when they see this, they get very intimidated, and especially if you're not a logic 10, in a lot of cases, this can be challenging. But I set this out there in front of you to just give you an idea. This is actually a client of mine. This is an example of a 5-day work week, but she actually has done a 7-day. There's lots of flex in here, and that you can see, even after hours, the things that we're talking about is, kids and, dinner time, that, these things are being placed in these different areas for the intentionality around how much time that they should actually take. This is a sales professional, so you can see that she's very intentional about how it is that she's putting time on her calendar to meet with specific clients. But even Debbie's point earlier, you can see in the meeting slots, before and after each one of those meetings, we're setting up buffer time, making sure they're checking that email and getting the paperwork together, but also being strategic about blocking out time so that we can prepare for upcoming meetings. And when is it that we're checking in with our team members, right? Is it just on a daily basis at specific times? How are we treating some of those different pieces? This is a framework, right? This is not like the law. And a lot of my clients, when they look at this initially, they're like, oh, heck no, there's no way you can get me there. And I'm like, okay, let's take baby steps. Let's find a few pieces that maybe during your life that you can control some of the uncontrollable items, put them in buckets, going back to our time blocking methodology, and test drive it for different segments. And you'll find that over time, you start to become excited about this idea that you know what to expect. I have this philosophy that every time that you have to make a decision, you have to use energy to do that. And so the fewer decisions that you've set up for yourself about what it is that the next task that you need to be doing, right? Are we planning that grocery store trip, or are we just picking the Oreos off the counter because we saw them and they look good, right? What's on the grocery list? Let's stick to the grocery list, right? Let's stick to what it is that you've created. And by the way, you're the author, you're the artist, you're the one who gets to pick what goes where. And, you know, how do you follow your energy? Maybe you like to be around people in the morning and you want to do independent work in the afternoon. But using a system like this, I can tell you, and not just in the 12-week year, but another book that Debbie and I were talking about. I'm a huge fan of Michael Hyatt. I shared with Debbie, I kind of have a celebrity crush on him, although he's old enough to be my father. His ideas are very similar. Like, you would think that Michael Hyatt and Brian Moran were like the same human. This is not uncommon information to use systems like this to help you so that you can become more efficient and effective. And the things that are priorities are going to get on the calendar and they're going to get done. You're not going to skip your workout. You're not going to miss opportunities to be with friends and family because you've been intentional. I have a client, super high-end marketing company. The number one thing that she started doing with her teenage children is that they got a night of the week. It was date night. She had stopped working at a certain time. They picked whatever they wanted to do, but she sees the, you know, kind of the deadline, if you will, of when it is that they're going to college. She wanted to be more intentional about her family time. So each of her kids knows what date night you get, mom. And it's changed the way that she's working because she's excited about what's happening after work, instead of being frantic and furious to figure out how am I going to fit these kids in on top of what I'm doing during my day job. So even though this may look a little intimidating, I'm really showing you like the graduate or doctorate level of this. I would encourage you to test drive these concepts as a way that you can streamline your activities and use this as kind of a framework of how to attack the things that are really important to you to include your job search.
Awesome feedback there. And Neil is another good example of this. He's somebody who went into the whole concept of, I need to not only get a new job, but I actually am considering, should I get a job or should I go into creating a whole new company? He was able to, with these concepts that Stephanie's talking about and getting very intentional. He has young kids in his family, wife, who is he's very devoted to his wife, came out of the physician's world as a physician assistant, which is highly structured, first of all, and generally allows for like a 4-day work week as a general concept. So it's kind of a cool mindset to be starting into. And he was really struggling with all of this. Okay, should I continue to work a 4-day work week? How will I manage that? And how will I keep these buffers that Stephanie's talking about in terms of my new thing that I want to go into, if either it's a job or it's a actual new business that I want to start. And he ended up deciding he could in fact start a new business and still have the lifestyle and the work-life balance that he wanted to create for himself. And he did that by laying out, being very intentional about it, as we've been talking about here, really figuring out calendar-wise, what does that need to look like? And what kind of partners do I need to have? How can I make this possible? Obviously, I can't do it all myself. So he ended up resetting some of his direction, putting together his personal brand, and he launched the telehealth allergy solution during the pandemic. Right before it, I should say. And so it actually escalated during the pandemic in terms of business because of what, how things turned out as a telehealth solution. It was actually very powerful. So regardless of the kind of trajectory that you're going on, these principles are going to be applicable to you, and getting clear about that. And even if you're going to start a new business, take the time to figure out, am I aligned with where I want to go? How do I want to spend my time? Like Stephanie's example of the high-end career executive who sees her kids going to college and says, I have got to be intentional about how my time is spent to create relationship with them. Maybe it's with your spouse. Maybe it's with that gym that you're struggling to get into the gym time, blocking those things out first and being intentional about it and knowing deciding what things are important to you, which speaks to this concept of having time at least once a month to go away outside of whatever your environment is. Maybe it's away from your home office, if that's where you're working, to just stop, pause, and think strategically about, okay, what do I want to have happen in the next, year, 3 years, 5 years? What do I see big picture coming? It can help to make for powerful outcomes. In the case of Neil, we were working with him on his roadmap. He ended up launching in 30 days. He had new board members and co-founders within a couple of months. He launched a pilot within 3 months, and then was off and running and got funding less than a year later. So, and it's just a great example, his particular one, about being very intentional and very time box, approached and very allocated in how he was going to do his time. So what dictates your time? Stephanie, we want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I guess the beginning of my 12-week year journey started with working with a coach in my industry. I remember we went to an annual meeting and I sat down, we were having a beer in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and chatting, and he asked me a question that has stuck with me probably 10 years now. And he asked me, Stephanie, what dictates your time? And I looked at him point blank and said, my calendar. And I think that mindset obviously is not where it is that we're headed, right? What it is that lands on the calendar at the end of the day, that's not what dictates our time. So going back to the, kind of the primary principle of the 12-week year, which is, what is that vision look like? And what is it that you're trying to achieve? And how is it that you're creating that time specifically so that you are allocating time to the things that need your attention for whatever it is that it looks like in your personal and your professional world. So I would encourage you to ask yourself that question as we leave here today. What is dictating my time? And am I in control of it, or is it in control of me?
That kind of brings us full circle back around to the whole concept about mindset that we started with at the very beginning. And if you guys find yourself struggling with, how do I manage my time? Where should I be allocating it correctly? How can I get the most traction in your career journey, wherever you're at in that whole journey? We would encourage you to just drop us a little note in the chat or connect with us to learn more about how that can work for you. Stephanie, again, obviously works with executives in coaching them as executive coach, specifically around this concept of time management, but a broader spectrum that she touches on as well. But really how to get in control of that, this whole notion of the 12-week year. I love that. Cut it down to a quarter of the time. It's funny, Stephanie, we just launched our 3 audacious goals in 3 months concept as well for our Career Alliance. That is our private group of executives that we work with. So it's very well aligned here. And I didn't notice it until this morning when I was looking through your stuff. I was like, oh, these things they're dovetailing in very nicely. So again, if you guys need help on these kinds of things, that's what we're here to help you do.